I was gonna rip his heart out. I'm the best ever. I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. There's no one can stop me. Lennox is a conqueror. No, I'm Alexander. He's no Alexander. I'm the best ever. There's never been anybody as ruthless. I'm Sonny Liston. I'm Jack Dempsey. There's no one like me. I'm from their claw. There's no one that can match me. My style is impetuous. My defense is impregnable. And I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat his children. Praise be to Allah.
It's time!
You're listening to the Cage Nation TV Prizefight Podcast. Coming to you from the Coastal Cameron Studios in Willington, North Carolina.
Are you ready?
Here's your host, the Big Fellah, Albert Cameron.
Let's get it on!
Well, thank you for joining us for the Prizefight Podcast. I'm your host, the Big Fellah, Mr. Albert Cameron. And if I haven't said it, thank you guys very much for joining us every week. It's a labor of love. It's you guys interacting with us. That's why we do it. Coming up this week on the Prizefight Podcast, we have the news break, which we're going to talk about Gladiators of the Cage and their big ordeal they have coming up. We got This Week in MMA History. And then, for the discussion topic, we're going to talk about the paradigm shift that is coming for the UFC. We talked about it in the Prizefight Podcast and Cage Nation TV since forever. It's not a matter of when. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It's not even really a matter of when anymore. It's a matter of how soon. First, we're going to pay some bills. Don't go nowhere. It's the Prizefight Podcast. Cage Nation TV is looking for bloggers and news contributors to help expand our reach into new markets. We're looking for writers to cover boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, traditional martial arts, wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and mixed martial arts. If you're interested in this completely volunteer, unpaid opportunity, visit www.cagenationtv.com/opportunities or email a writing sample to cagenationtv@gmail.com. We're looking for folks with genuine enthusiasm for the combat sports who enjoy sharing their opinion.
It's time for the Cage Nation TV Action News Break.
Gladiators of the Cage is going from Pittsburgh to Hollywood. The Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania MMA promotion lent its resources to the WGN American drama Outsiders starring Ryan Hurst of the Sons of Anarchy fame. While tight-lipped on the details, Gladiators of the Cage were lending their resource to the show for their Season 2 finale, specifically The Cage. Casting directors were looking for a referee. It's easy to imagine that an MMA fight will be featured in the Season 2 finale. Be looking for Gladiators of the Cage on the show Outsiders. The UFC starts handing out pink slips amid reports of low morale. Late last week, it was reported that the UFC had terminated the contracts of a host of fighters from their roster. Among the fighters that were let go were Shane Campbell, Kevin Casey, Cody Easy, Corey Hendricks, Enrique Marin, Kenny Robertson, Sean Spencer, and Alberto Uda. The most surprising of the releases were Antonio Bigfoot Silva and Tamden McCrory. While surprising, some sources are saying that Silva and McCrory parted ways with the UFC mutually. Stay tuned to the Prizefight Podcast for more on the morale situation. Is Shane Carwin coming out of retirement? In the day and age where everyone has a blog and a social media presence, it's hard to say which rumors have validity and which don't. There's a rumor going around that Shane Carwin may be putting back on the gloves to compete for the Risen Fighting Federation. At current, the Risen Fighting Federation heavyweight division is a little lopsided, with the light heavyweight division being the division of interest. No official word from Carwin or Risen Fighting Federation at this time. It's all speculation and rumor at the current moment. Cage Nation TV would like to take a second and formally thank all of the businesses that have taken the time to sponsor a mixed martial artist or a boxer as they have trained to attain greatness. In the world of business, it can be looked at as an advertising expense to get your name out there. But did you know that your sponsorship dollars is actually keeping the American dream alive? Your help and support is actually changing the lives of aspiring athletes. Working hard and reaching for the brass ring is truly the great American story. We encourage all of our listeners and followers to support businesses that sponsor your favorite fighters. And thank you to those businesses for your continued support and encouragement.
This week in MMA history.
This week in MMA history, October 23rd through October 29th. October 29th, 2011 at UFC 137 Penn vs. Diaz. Nick Diaz's title shot against reigning champion George St. Pierre was canceled due to Diaz missing media events. The natural-born killer Carlos Condit was given Diaz's title shot, but St. Pierre had to withdraw due to a knee injury. BJ Penn announced via Twitter that he was offered a fight that he could not refuse and accepted the bout with Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz would go on to defeat BJ Penn via decision in the main event. October 23rd, 2010, at UFC 121, Lesnar vs. Velasquez. Cain Velasquez would capture his first UFC heavyweight championship via knockout of the reigning champion Brock Lesnar. Velasquez would go on to be one of the most visible heavyweight champions of the modern era, and Lesnar almost got into a post-fight altercation with professional wrestler The Undertaker. October 25th, 2008, at UFC 90, Silva vs. Cote. Future heavyweight champion Junior Dos Santos makes his UFC debut. Dos Santos won a knockout victory over fellow future heavyweight champion Fabrizio Verdum. Welcome back to the Prizefight Podcast. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. And by elephant in the room, I mean the prediction that we made quite a while ago here on the Prizefight Podcast. We said that when the UFC was purchased, let's talk about history. We talked about, is the UFC going to be purchased? Then we talked about, well, if it is, who's going to buy it? And if they do, what are they going to do with it? And then it was not so much a question of, is it going to happen? It happened. We reported that it happened. One of the big questions I had was, how do you take a product that was a $2 million with an M, a $2 million investment, and then turn it into a $4 billion payoff? And we talked about that. For every $1 that the Fertittas and Dana White put into the UFC, for every $1, they were getting $2,000 back. That's like that's putting $1 into the, buying a $1 lottery ticket, scratching it off. You won $2,000, but you did that 2 million times. That's exactly likened to what happened. How do you take the people who turned the UFC into the largest and best combat sports product? How do you take that from them and say, okay, we bought it from you, here's how we're going to do it better? How do you take a product from the person who made it and made it great and hope to improve upon it? That's what I need to wrap my head around. How do we do that? How do we make it better? And I'm giving WMG-IMG the benefit of the doubt. The people who are involved in WMG-IMG are people who are experts at entertainment, folks who own the New England Patriots, Anthony Kiedis and Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers in there. People who know how to entertain people, I think, is the long and short that. They probably should have called their company People Who Can Entertain People. That's what they do. That is their wheelhouse. In their respective platforms, they are good at it. But at no time did I see anyone involved in that conglomerate that was an MMA expert. MMA is barely 23 years old. MMA as we know it, let's put it that way. And when I say MMA as we know it, I mean the Gracies, the UFC. Modern MMA stemmed from the UFC. Before it was called NHB, No Holds Barred, Dan Severn competed in NHB. Before it was MMA, it was NHB. But MMA as we know it, that we watch on Fight Pass, we watch on Fox, we watch on pay-per-view, stemmed from the Gracies in UFC 1. Semaphore Entertainment Group, SEG, created the platform, and then Zuffa bought it. After Zuffa bought it, they turned it from a regular mess, a hot mess if you will, and then turned it into the MMA giant that it was. The MMA Super Show. If there ever was a Super Bowl of combat sports, the Super Bowl of people getting together to punch each other in the face, it was the Zuffa era MMA. So Zuffa sold it. They're gone. Zuffa is transitioning their way out. Dana White will be the president of the UFC for at least 5 years. That was the contract he signed, and boy did they make it worth his while. Because Dana White doesn't do anything that Dana White doesn't want to do. You don't hold a gun to Dana White's head and say, okay, Dana, you're going to do this, or else. Dana White does not do that. Dana White does what Dana White wants to do on a regular basis. So, WMG-IMG had to make it worth his while to do that. Now, some of the things that came down this week was that WMG-IMG is starting to do things that are lowering morale. One person even went as far as to say that morale around the UFC office is likened to that of, a funeral home. Do you know what kind of morale is at a funeral home? It's a funeral home! People are dead! There is no good morale at a funeral home. How do you lower morale in a company you just started taking over? You start firing people. In the UFC talent, Antonio Bigfoot Silva, UFC heavyweight championship contender, a man that defeated Fedor Emelianenko, the greatest of all time, according to some people. I think he's the greatest of all time. Bigfoot Silva defeated him in Strikeforce. Bigfoot has had some fantastic UFC heavyweight fights. Well, he's gone. Tamden the Barncat McCrory, he's gone. Reports are saying that these guys left under amicable terms. They said, okay, UFC, something clearly isn't working. We're just going to walk away the UFC. Okay, that is fine. Georges St-Pierre, possibly one of the greatest UFC welterweight champions of all time. Great trilogy with Matt Hughes. Great fights with Frank Trigg. Excellent bouts with Matt the Terracera. One of the greatest UFC welterweight champions of all time. Was going to come back. He was in retirement. The UFC welterweight division had completely changed. Georges St-Pierre is coming back. He's coming to the negotiation table. Okay, guys, we're going to figure this out. I'm going to come back. No, I'm not. Georges St-Pierre went to the press and said, I am a free agent. This bullshit contract that the UFC had on the table and no longer works for me. In fact, I was willing to talk to Zuffa, but WMG-IMG started strong-arming me, and now I want nothing to do with it. Sources close to the situation said the UFC will be a very different company by the first of the year. Well, that's business. We talk about the business of MMA a lot. We talk about what is the fight business. If I were to buy McDonald's corporate, McDonald's is one of the most stable brands in the United States, and I'm going to buy it. Big Fellah investments finally paid off. I have the capital to buy the McDonald's corporation. I have the funds available to buy the controlling interest of stock in McDonald's. And I'm going to come in and be like, okay, yeah, the quarter pounder is fantastic. Sure, the Big Mac is great, but I want to go in a different direction. It is my right and freedom to do so. There's nothing stopping me from changing the Big Mac recipe. There's nothing stopping me from saying, okay, instead of serving Pepsi, we're going to serve chocolate milk, or else. There's nothing saying that instead of French fries, we're going to start serving deep fried pickles. There's nothing stopping me from doing that. Is it a good idea for me to change what made McDonald's McDonald's? Probably not. And what's going to happen is people's feathers are going to start getting ruffled. Stock prices are going to drop. We talked about Alliance MMA. You now have initial public offerings to purchase shares of an MMA company. You now have the ability to own a part of combat sports in a way that is completely unprecedented. So if I buy McDonald's, people are going to start billing like, okay, this guy's clearly a madman. He has no idea what made McDonald's great. So we got to drive. We're just going to ban and ship. We're going to go buy Burger King stock. Okay, that's what's going to happen. It's a part of the backlash. The people at WMG-IMG feel that they have their own people, and let's stress that, their own people that they want to put in place. WMG-IMG believes that they have people in their pocket that are going to do a better job of portraying the UFC according to their vision. Let's stress that again. Their vision. They purchased the UFC. They can do whatever they want with it. If they want to turn into the ultimate pillow fighting league, that is their freedom to do so because they own the property. They own the Octagon. They own the UFC brand. They own the tape library. They own, the trademark as real as it gets. They own all of that. That was part of the $4 billion purchase. They own that. They can do with it whatever they want. WMG-IMG believes that they have people in their pocket that's going to carry out the vision of the UFC according to their vision. The UFC, according to Zuffa, was great, but it's not what WMG-IMG wants. They purchased it for a reason. They feel like there is a future, a destination to be had with this brand according to their vision. The UFC, under the control of the Semaphore Entertainment Group, SEG, it's really different than what the Zuffa UFC was. UFC's 1 through 29, there was a distinct feel. There was the Ultiman. He was the brand, the bald guy with the UFC belt. He was the brand. There was early 90s, late 80s kind of music that anchored everything. The intros were a little dated. According to today's standards, a little dated. They looked a little different. A little vintage. Zuffa comes in, and they start changing things, out of necessity. The way SEG was running the UFC, it was a matter of time before it all fell apart. They needed rules. They needed to change things to be embraced by the stage, and thanks to Zuffa LLC, helmed by Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta and Dana White, MMA is one of the fastest growing sports on the planet. Not just combat sports, but MMA is a sport. Would you have ever thought that in 1993 you could travel 3 hours in any direction and catch a fight? Because that's really what can happen. If you got in your car on any given Saturday night, you can travel 3 hours and you probably run into a fight. Would you have ever thought that in 93? No. And thanks to Zuffa, thanks to their work to have MMA embraced as much as it is, MMA is readily available, and we owe that to them. Now, I have not been a part of the WMG-IMG vision meetings, the planning sessions, the strategy meetings. I have no idea what the vision is. But whatever it is, people like Tom Wright, Ken Berger, Gary Cook, Giovanni Decker, Jamie Pollock, and Marshall Zelaznik aren't a part of it. Now, who are those names you just rattled off, big fella? Well, those are executives. People at the top who were let go. According to an article published by Forbes 3 days ago, it is heir apparent that the UFC is abandoning plans for global expansion. Dana White himself was quoted as saying, we're planning on effing taking over the world. Well, apparently those plans aren't part of the WMG-IMG vision. Tom Wright, the Canadian executive. Ken Berger, VP and General Manager of UFC Asia. Gary Cook, Head Ops of Europe and Middle East and Africa. Giovanni Decker, President and General Manager of Brazil. Jamie Pollock, Senior Vice President of Global Content. Marshall Zelaznik, Chief Content Officer. Good God. Some of the highest paying cards that the UFC has comes right out of Brazil. And what terrible timing to be kicking out your head of Brazil whenever you have high-profile fighters like Anderson Silva saying that the UFC doesn't respect Brazilian fighters. What? The UFC's expansion into global markets was part of their money-making strategy. UFC at the O2 Arena in London is traditionally one of their biggest cards. In Germany, in Ireland, in Japan, in Brazil, the UFC expanding outward was taking a national product. 8 or 9 years ago, there was Pride who handled Japan and Asia, and the UFC was in North America. And then they started coming at each other with Europe being in the middle. The UFC coming into Germany, coming into Ireland, coming into England was big news. That was huge because now our brothers from across the pond, we're going to come together on something. We all love the UFC. We're all going to come together on it. So now WMG-IMG doesn't feel that's part of their vision. Now, let me preface with 5 days ago when I started hearing about these layoffs, I was angry. Day after that, I was a little steamed. Yesterday, I was irritated. Today, I'm a little insouciant about it. If you're not planning on expanding your market and growing, what could the plan possibly be? Is the UFC going to be so different that it needs to reinvest itself in the United States market, in the North American market? Canada has so much to offer the combat sports. George St. Pierre is from Canada. Patrick Cote, Dirty Joe Dirksen, all from Canada, who began their careers in Canada. On UFC Fight Pass, right now, I can get on and I can watch fights from TKO, which is the organization where George Rush St. Pierre, the greatest welterweight champion of all time, cut his teeth. That's where George St. Pierre got his start. Canadian fans have buying power. They have market share. Asian fans have buying power and market share. In Europe, there's a reason why promotions like Cage Rage are so big. In Brazil, Rio Heroes, as much as I hated it, was there. Shooto Brazil. And then the UFC's Brazilian, the IBC, the International Vale Tudo Championships were there. UFC was making money in Brazil. And for international expansion, to completely abandon that post, I think, is cutting off your nose to spite your face, not to mince words. Again, I'm not a part of the WMG-IMG strategy. I have no idea what they're up to. I do know for certain that they know more about large-scale entertainment than I do. Whether you love the Patriots or you hate them, you still know they exist. You know the Patriots exist. Whether you're rooting for the Patriots or you're rooting against them, the Patriots every time grab your attention. Every single time grab your attention. So what is going to come of all of this? Well, other organizations are going to benefit from the global abandonment, if indeed global abandonment is what's happening. WMG-IMG might really believe that they can handle, that they can coordinate the international events from their bases in Nevada or wherever they're planning on having their corporate office. They may really believe that, hey, you know what, we can promote in Japan, Brazil, and Europe. We can do it in-house. We don't need to pay these people a bunch of money. We can do it in-house. We're going to be fine. It could be a consolidation tactic. Maybe there's too many executives. Maybe under the Zuffa banner, there's too many executives. I have seen that happen. I have seen companies that are so top-heavy that it's counterproductive. Maybe that's what WMG-IMG is doing. Maybe they are slimming down their executive roster. Maybe they are freeing up job opportunities for people where they really need them. Again, I don't know. Perhaps WMG-IMG has a completely different plan. Who knows? But if it is indeed global abandonment, we're going to walk away from trying to take over the world. Other organizations are going to benefit. Risen Fighting Federation could not be looking for a better opportunity right now. Bellator, with their partnerships with the Risen Fighting Federation, has a fantastic opportunity of taking advantage of global markets if the UFC is walking away from them. World Series of Fighting has a global component, and they're trying to get to Madison Square Garden, which would be huge. Anyone who's going to go to Madison Square Garden to hold a fight is going to be tremendously huge. There's so much history, and to get MMA history in there, I don't care who gets to Madison Square Garden. As long as they're an MMA main event on pay-per-view at Madison Square Garden, we all win. Period. We have staked our place in history. To hold a main event at Madison Square Garden, we have said, hey guys, we have arrived. The laid off executives are either going to take their trade secrets to other promotions like Risen, like World Series of Fighting, like Bellator, possibly make some money as executives, or they might get together and start a new company. How many times has Sakakibara been involved in something else? Whenever Dream Stage Entertainment, the company that owned Pride FC, whenever they folded, those guys got together without Sakakibara. They got together and said, hey, we're going to start a new company, and that was Dream. It didn't last long, but they did it. That is not likely, but it could happen. It's a possibility. It is not outside the realm of possibility. So we're talking about a complete paradigm shift. If you take anything away from listening to the Prizefight Podcast this week, it is the proof and the evidence that everything is changing. What an incredible time to be alive, folks. What an incredible time to look back and say, hey, you know what? I was in the thick of MMA back in 2016 when everything changed. And as we as fans, we as the people who consume mixed martial arts, we have more control than I think we give ourselves credit for. If it weren't for the fans on the forums, if it weren't for the fans going to events, if it weren't for the fans buying the tapes, MMA would have never survived the Dark Ages. And by Dark Ages, I mean UFC 12 through 29, even into 35. If it weren't for us, we wouldn't have survived. We are the backbone, we are the lifeblood, and no matter what WMG-IMG does, no matter what Bellator does, no matter what Risen Fighting Federation does, as long as we maintain our hardcore fandom in MMA, there will always be fights to consume. It's not a bad thing. It's just a change. Change is not bad. Change is good. Change for the sake of change can be bad, but this isn't the sake of change. Change is happening because the market is dictating it. The market is so good by the way we spend our money. We, as the fans, it's so good the way we spend our money that people got together and coughed up $4 billion to buy the flagship. With buying power comes decision-making power. If the WMG-IMG is doing something we don't like, we start consuming another MMA organization. They start putting on fights that don't make sense. They start changing a product to the way we don't like it. We go to someone who does. Money talks, and that's the long and the short of it. Next week on the Prizefight Podcast, we're going to have MMA news. We're going to have This Week in MMA History, and probably in the next 7 days, something's going to piss me off to the point where I'm going to feel the need to use a platform to talk about it. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Big Fellah, Mr. Albert Cameron. Thank you so much for joining us for the Prizefight Podcast, and until next week, fights, Cameron, action.
Thank you for tuning in to the Cage Nation Prizefight Podcast. All rights reserved 2016 to 2017 Planet Aries Sports. The Prizefight Podcast is part of the Cage Nation Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.cagenationtv.com.